A trade war continuing to unfold between the US and China. Beijing has slapped tit-for-tat measures on Washington and filed a complaint to the World Trade Organization. This is right after America's 10% tariffs on Chinese goods came into effect today. China will impose a 15% levy on imports of coal and liquefied natural gas from the United States, while crude oil, agricultural machinery, big-engined vehicles and pickup trucks will face a 10% duty. These will take effect next Monday. Separately, China's Commerce Ministry says it will impose export controls effective immediately on key metals used in sectors including defense and clean energy. On that list, tungsten, tellurium, ruthenium, molybdenum, and ruthenium-related items. Beijing produces more than 80% of the world's tungsten supply. It's crucial in the manufacture of weapons and semiconductors. China's authorities also launching an antitrust investigation against Google and adding 2 US firms into its list of unreliable entities. That's a PVH, owner of Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein, as well as biotech giant Illumina that recently partnered NVIDIA. And for more, the CNA's Wong joins us live from Hong Kong alongside Kate Fisher in Washington, D.C. Let's get to May first in Hong Kong. May, China's moves, we just listed them for you. What's the rationale behind how Beijing has retaliated?
China simply wants to show that it is not going to sit quiet and that it has a response. And that if the US wants to play this game, then China too can play this game and also use the same tactics against the Americans. Now, remember here also that the measures that are put out by the Chinese, they seem rather measured. You cited a lot of the examples earlier. For example, the 15% the 15% tariff that's going to be imposed on US coals. Well, that's not going to be very substantial given the fact that in 2023, for example, the US only exports less than 7% of its total coal export to China. So the impact on the US coal is actually going to be quite minimal. But that is the approach that China is taking, unlike the US, which is imposing a blanket additional 10% tariffs on Chinese products. Now, on the other hand as well, you can see China rolling out other tools, for example, filing a complaint with WTO against the US, launching its own anti-monopoly trust investigation into Google, which is not fully operational in China anyway, and finally putting more US companies onto its own unreliable entity list. What that means is that China can take actions against these US companies by, for example, revoking some of the work permits of these personnel working for these US companies, or restricting or banning some of these US companies' investments into China. The ultimate goal is really to bring US back into the negotiating table and to also try and convince US President Donald Trump to either suspend the tariffs going forward or perhaps to relook at how to come up with a win-win solution, because China has maintained that nobody's going to be a winner in this trade and tariff war.
May, you mentioned China's need to bring President Trump back to the negotiating table. Of course, some of those measures that we mentioned, those are effective immediately. Others, like the tariffs, will take effect if there's no resolution Monday of next week. So Donald Trump, we're heard to speak to President Xi Jinping on the telephone sometime this week. What are they likely to be discussing?
The talks will be highly anticipated, like how Donald Trump has rolled back on implementing the additional tariffs on Canada and Mexico, while China too is perhaps hoping that Trump will also take that same track or to remove these additional tariff threats altogether. Now, remember here that at the end of the day, it was because of some of the key issues that Donald Trump raised in terms of saying that he wants to tackle illegal immigration, he wants to tackle the drug trafficking problem in the US, and that's the reason why he's imposing all these additional tariffs. China has said that it has got nothing to do with China. In fact, these are domestic problems that the US needs to sort out for themselves. However, you can expect China to come up with perhaps offerings to say that, yes, they will step up on trying to curb the drug trafficking, trying to curb the precursors going into the US. When we talk about illegal immigration as well, in 2022, for example, the illegal crossing of of Chinese citizens via the US-Mexico border. That was only about 2,000 Chinese citizens going into the US illegally. But last year, in 2024, that number jumped to more than 38,000 illegal Chinese immigrants going into the US. So China will obviously try to offer help in that, trying to restrict its Chinese citizens from doing so. But at the end of the day, it's all about trying to resolve this in an amicable manner so that both sides will not have to go into a full-blown trade war, because at the end of the day, it's all about trying to resolve this matter in a friendly manner and also try not to impose all these restrictions on the companies and on the consumers, which will ultimately bear the brunt.
Oh, thanks. May Wong, they're reporting live from Hong Kong. For Canada and Mexico, as we heard earlier from May, they managed to meet some demands on illegal immigration and drug trafficking, and they have got a temporary reprieve after those last-minute phone calls with the US president. Kate Fisher joins us for the perspective from Washington, D.C. Kate, what kind of deals did Canada and Mexico strike in order to get that 30-day reprieve? Presumably, this is what Mr. Trump wanted.
Well, certainly that is what he's spinning. He's saying that, look, these countries have done what I asked for. I applied the pressure and they obeyed. His press secretary saying Mexico and Canada are bending the knee to President Trump. The Mexican leader has agreed to put 10,000 Mexican National Guard troops on the border with the United States. Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, has said he'll put 10,000 frontline personnel along his border with the US, as well as working with the US in a joint strike force to combat fentanyl trafficking, money laundering and organised crime across the border. He's also said he's going to put a fentanyl czar in place. So Donald Trump is saying this is what he asked for. He asked for more help on combating the flow of fentanyl and illegal migrants. And he can now kind of claim a victory on this. But some analysts are suggesting that a lot of these measures were already in the works. And by the very fact that his kind of parameters, he hasn't really put clear objectives in place. And so it's easy for him to claim victory on whatever is put out there. And he also now, of course, has 30 days to negotiate more before he can put this threat back on the table.
Well, Kate, whoever claims victory, ultimately, as May mentioned in Hong Kong, the one who pays the price, or those who might pay the price, would be consumers and businesses. How have businesses reacted to this temporary suspension of levies on Mexico and Canada?
Well, I think it's been a really turbulent 24 hours for them. Of course, on Monday morning, we woke up to the stock market tumbling. By the end of Monday, it had gained back most of those losses. The Dow Jones, for example, closing just 0.3% down. But those businesses had to panic during the day and then make potential new plans for what they were going to do. And then all of a sudden that was put on ice, but only for 30 days. They still don't know what's going to happen. And I think the big issue for them is this uncertainty. Their whole planning procedures are thrown into chaos. And that, of course, spells real danger for any business that is trying to hire people, make investments, ask for investment. And that is the biggest, I think, the biggest upshot of all of this is that even though there is a reprieve for some of these businesses and they are breathing a sigh of relief at that, they still are concerned. They still can't fully get back into gear because they don't know what's going to happen next. And they don't know if this is going to happen with other parts of the world, notably the European Union, maybe India, other places that Donald Trump has suggested could be about to be receiving tariffs.
Well, thanks. Kate Fisher there reporting live from Washington, D.C. Our Southeast Asian countries also taking steps to manage these new tariffs from the United States. Malaysia's Prime Minister pledging to build trade relations with other nations such as BRICS members China, Russia and Brazil, instead of waiting for the impact of potential levies. Anwar Ibrahim telling Parliament that Malaysia must be proactive in its approach while also not acting in haste to counter them, given the many geopolitical uncertainties. Malaysia is one of the 9 partner countries in BRICS, but it has yet to receive full membership. Meanwhile, Singapore's Foreign Affairs Minister says the country is unlikely to be targeted by direct US tariffs. Still, it may suffer indirect impact amid friction or degradation of economic integration, global supply chains and world trade. Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan told members of parliament that tariffs will be a reality going forward.
We need to keep our eyes open, but we need to be very careful in what we say and how we behave, and playing it straight, saying the same thing to everyone, and meaning and doing what we say is valuable. But I do need to prepare Singaporeans that it will be a turbulent ride in the months or years to come.
Dr. Balakrishnan says Singapore needs to engage with multiple powers, and these include not just the US and China, but India, the European Union, and Africa. He highlighted Singapore's signing free trade agreements with new partners in Latin America, despite the mood running counter to globalization.
We will have to continue to play a constructive, inclusive role in a nimble way, given our size. So that means we have to be consistent, reliable, and a trustworthy host to enterprises from all over the world, including the US and China. We will uphold the rule of law and the sanctity of contract.
Meanwhile, Thailand is set to increase imports of US ethane and agricultural produce in an attempt to avoid a trade war with the United States. The government reportedly asking companies to step up purchases by at least 1 million tons. That's according to a government official who spoke with Bloomberg News. The US is Thailand's second largest trading partner and had a surplus of around $35.4 billion with Washington last year. Mr. Trump has threatened to slap tariffs on other countries in similar situations, including its allies.